So you're a new manager. Maybe you're a manager for the first time. Maybe you're leading a new team or with a new company. You want some tips on how to do things right, how to avoid doing things wrong. I've been in the business a long time. That's being in a management side, labor and employment attorney, and an HR leader. So I've seen everything from where new managers can get tripped up to how small issues can become very big ones later on. I want to create 5 quick tips for managers and what you can do as you start to lead this team or in a new organization. The first is to listen. It's really important as you're a new manager. Oftentimes you may want to be establishing your credibility. You may even feel insecure or nervous or have imposter syndrome. But the best thing you can do to instill confidence is to go into your team, meet individually with your team, cross-functionally, and ask people, what advice would you give me as I go in the role? Listen to them rather than jumping in saying, yeah, I did this in my last company. That's a quick way to make people think that you're a one-upper. If you truly want their insight, then listen. Say, thanks so much. I'm so happy to take this internally. I'd love to reach up, follow up on any points of discussion, and really take that to heart. Because that's a way when you let employees know that you'll listen to them, you'll take their feedback, their ideas, it can create avenues of trust that can last for your entire working relationship and really make them feel better about the company, more motivated about what they do, and trust. And so listening is the first step. Another is to ask for advice. So not just what you would do, but truly ask them, if you were in my shoes, what are some of the concrete steps you would take first? A lot of them will have ideas that you may never have thought of. And it's really important to even ask this for individuals that have never managed before, because this gives them an opportunity to really voice things they may have held on to. They may be talking amongst the team, but to say these and look for common threads. Again, look cross-functionally. You may be an engineer, but it may be great to talk to finance. What would you see? What's advice for how we can work together? This is all the type of advice that can set that tone as you move forward in the organization. Another is for continuous feedback. So as a new manager, it can often feel overwhelming to give feedback, positive or negative, to employees. And both are equally important. You see a lot of tips around how to give that positive feedback. If someone does a good job, don't just tell them, good job, and move on, or just assume, hey, their pay is thanks enough for what they do. Take a moment and be specific. Hey, Jane, hey, Joe, I saw the way that you took that question from a client and you were able to take that and tweak the proposal to make it a more easy decision for them to get to yes. Or I saw that you recognized an issue that was holding up a production process and you proactively suggested something that is going to be beneficial moving forward. So using that creativity, we want people to speak up. Giving those signals that you appreciate what individuals do and also that it should be an open forum for individuals to give feedback can bring sea change to an organization. And so giving that continuously rather than just ignoring it or holding on for performance review season, do both. Give it to them in the moment. And then as you're looking at their review down the road, have a Google Doc or OneNotes app, Microsoft, anything like that that you use to hold on so that it makes your life easier when you're giving that more formal feedback during review season if you have it. But making sure that you're taking those opportunities to give specific positive feedback. Likewise, if you have to give constructive feedback, that can be an opportunity where managers really shy away and think, I don't know how to say this. They can be frustrated because if you're a manager, maybe you were a strong individual contributor and you were promoted based on that, maybe even not with enough training or any training at all. You may have frustration that others that had your prior role or have a similar role aren't taking their own initiative. But you know what? There's a reason you were put in that position and you're there to give that feedback. Hey, Jane. Hey, Joe. I know that your numbers aren't what you want, but let's get to the bottom of it. Okay, let's look at your activity. Our expectation, where we see the numbers hold out, is if you have 12 to 15 calls a day, that will tend to lead to this amount of activity, this amount of sales close. So walk through their basic activity. Or if you see mistakes they made, sit down and say, look, I want to call your attention to it so that you understand this. Moving forward, if you have a presentation to avoid these mistakes, print it out and read over it. Send it to a colleague. Send it to me. I can give you my feedback before we send it out externally to avoid this moving forward. But it's really important that we appear crisp in all of our communications. Then have that. Again, if an employee does something and you don't have time, you feel like, to address it formally, and you put it off to performance review season, think about it. It feels awful for an employee, just for a manager to say, well, this mistake you made 2 months ago, when you may not have even raised it in the first place. It feels like you're just hitting them out over the head or out to get them. So it's really important for managers to continuously give that positive or constructive critical feedback to employees and give that consistently. Ensure that you're treating employees fairly, treating them equally, and constantly have that. 4 is to be honest. Again, these things can sound very, very basic, but honesty is really important. If you're a new leader, for example, you may feel like you need to show credibility. Say, oh, I have meetings with the entire executive suite next week. You may not, and that's okay. You're humans too. But don't feel like you need to overpuff what your responsibility is, or I'm so busy tomorrow. You may not be, and that's okay. Encourage your teams to set up time for themselves to work independently if they need it as well. But being honest is incredibly important as you talk to your employees. If they feel like they can't trust you, then that will do a couple things. One, as they're working, it makes them demotivated, so they're going to not do as much work product. They may be looking externally the same time they're working for you. So just remember that honesty, and that can be good or bad. It ties into the last, which is to take ownership. When you're a manager, you can often get caught in the tie of being good cop and bad cop, wanting to tell an employee, look, I'm on your side, I'm on your team. But sometimes you may have to deliver bad news or disappointing news. That may be about pay. A lot of my videos, I talk about how to communicate pay this time of year. But when you have to deliver that news, the instinct for a lot of new managers is to say, look, this is out of my hands, because you want that employee to like you. But for an employee to respect you, you have to be able to deliver that deliberately. So, for example, if the company's performance is such that you're not going to be able to give their full or almost any pay increase or bonus or any of that gets impacted, talking to your own leader who makes those decisions so you understand where that comes from is important, in pressure testing that. What can we do to have a solution? So when you come to the employee, rather than saying, look, this is what the pay is, I know it's disappointing, this is out of my hands, rather than painting that, then the employee just thinks, well, then I need to talk to the manager above you, so they're not going to respect you, and your whole ploy to make them like you is going to make them think you don't have any power. And it may not be your decision, but being able to communicate that and say, for example, the company's performance is such that we have to be very cautious of our budgets. And if they have their performance as well in there that affected that number, you can say, there's certain aspects of your performance that, as we've discussed, we're below where you need to be. But let's talk about what we can do for you, what goals you can meet, what are projects you can take on to show your value so that we can make a case when business conditions improve. At the end of the day, the employee may make the decision of, look, if I'm not getting the compensation, I'll look elsewhere. A lot of employees are doing that right now during the great resignation, so to speak. But if you explain the business circumstances and say, we as a business have to make these tough decisions, and I know it's disappointing, but I want you to understand where it comes from, that does sound a lot more caring than if you just say, look, this is out of my hands, we're in shitty business conditions. So some of these things are, as managers, just tactics that you can do to establish credibility. The last L in, which is point 5.5, is to always try to make your one-on-ones. Commonly, managers get so caught up, whether they're getting involved in the business or they're working on the business or things come up. We understand things always come up for individuals not getting to meet one-on-ones. But one of the most common issues I've heard from employees griping is that their manager skips their one-on-ones, either cancels constantly at the last minute or doesn't show up. And managers will say, I know, I'm so busy, I really shouldn't do that. And you really, really, really shouldn't, because telling employees I have this constantly sends that clear message to them of, ultimately your development isn't that important. But honoring that commitment, again, we understand that there's emergencies, but especially if you have a client meeting, for example, it's one thing if there's a very difficult client meeting, it's impossible to reschedule. But if you make a practice to tell individuals when you're making time to say, oh, this is my time for team one-on-ones, and I carve that time out so I can focus with them and show them that they're critical, and that's a promise I've made to my team, so we need to find time outside of that. If you vocalize that to others, whether cross-functionally or even externally, assuming there's not something that in your organization that frowns upon that, but if you say that to others and show how much you care about your employees, it really shows, very strong signals about who you are as a leader, and that sends it to your employees as well. And it's, again, kind of a quick, seems easy, but abiding by your one-on-ones, showing up prepared, and working collaboratively with the employee to set that agenda and make that time impactful and powerful is one of the best investments you can make as a manager, or conversely, it's one of the quickest ways to lose your team and potentially miss an opportunity right out of the gate to set the relationship. So let's say that that's 5.5 things that I recommend for managers. Follow along and feel free to always send feedback for other videos you'd like to see. Thanks.